it's Adrian, welcome to my channel. Today I'm here to bring you the last half of my July wrap-up. I've already done the first half of my July wrap-up in my mid-month wrap-up, so go check that out in case you've missed it, where I read 5 other books. In the last half of July I read 7 books. I'm very excited about that. A couple of them were audiobooks. I'll talk to you about those in a minute, but let's just jump right in. The first book that I completed was Ace of Shades by Amanda Foodie. I actually have a spoiler-free speed review up on my channel already for that. I'll leave it up here for you and in the description box below, so you can go check that out. Ace of Shades follows a girl named Anne, and Anne comes from a finishing school. She's very prim and very proper, but one day she gets a letter from her mother who says that she's gone to the City of Sin, and if she's not back in 2 months, that means she's dead. If she needs to find her or find out what happened to her, she can go and find a man named Levi in New Rains, this City of Sin, and she does that, and they go on this hunt for her mother. I enjoyed this book. I found it a little bit confusing. The world building was a little bit confusing. Some of the characters were a little bit confusing, but I talk all about that in my wrap-up. You can go check that out if you're interested. I gave it a 3.5. If I'm being lenient, a 3.75, but more 3.5. Next up, I listened to an audiobook, What I Saw and How I Lied by Judy Blundell. This one is post-World War II, and it follows a girl named Evie, and Evie and her parents go down to Florida after the war, and they meet some interesting people, and it's a mystery. Guys, I didn't like this one. I gave it a 1.5, and I felt like I was being very lenient. The only reason that I gave it a 1.5 and not just a plain old 1 is because I did enjoy the post-war setting. I liked reading about how families were dealing with the aftermath of the war, how the soldiers were dealing with the aftermath of the war, and that to me was very interesting. I do like post-World War II books. This one, though, first of all, it was about a 16-year-old girl who was falling in love with a 23-year-old guy, and then this whole mystery, and then there was a murder mystery on top of it, and it just didn't go anywhere for me. I didn't enjoy it. I'm sorry, but I didn't enjoy it, so I got a 1.5. Next up was another 1.5, maybe 2 stars. I had a lot of these 1.5, 2 star rates this month, guys. And that was Linger by Mary Stiefvater. This is the second book to the Wolves of Mercy Falls quartet. I think it's 4 books now. The first book follows a girl named Grace, and Grace has been pulled off of her tire swing when she was a kid, and she was attacked by wolves. She was also saved by a wolf, and this wolf has been guarding her ever since then. We're 6 years later, and she meets this boy named Sam. She finds out that Sam is this wolf that's been guarding her, so this is essentially a werewolf romance. I'm not a huge paranormal romance fan, but the first book I enjoyed well enough. I think I gave it a 3 stars. This book, though, everybody got so whiny, and I feel like this whole book was sort of going nowhere. It sort of builds up to this thing that we knew was going to happen, and so it just... I wasn't a huge fan. The only thing that I liked about this book was Cole. Cole is a new character that we're introduced to in this book, and we also see things from Cole's perspective. I enjoyed him. He was a little bit whiny as well, but I enjoyed him more than any of the other characters. This whole Grace and Sam couple thing is starting to drive me nuts. It's very much Edward and Bella from Twilight. That like super I'm gonna die without you kind of love that I can't handle it. Next up, I picked up The Timekeeper by Mitch Albom. This one I also have a spoiler-free speed review for. This one follows a man named Dor, and Dor is the first man, essentially, to develop the concept of time. And because of that, he's punished by God, and he's turned into Father Time, and he's sentenced to watch man's evolving obsession with time and how it affects mankind. This one I liked as well. I have a spoiler-free review for this one too, so if you're interested in knowing that. I very much liked Dor's character. I didn't like the other characters. I found them to be very extreme. Unfortunately, because of that and because I wasn't a huge fan of the characters, I only ended up giving this one a 3.75, maybe a 4 stars. Dor's character, however, I found very impactful, very insightful. I talk a lot about that in my review, so make sure you go check that out. Next up was by far my favorite read for the month of July, and that's The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hong. I love this book. Everybody has been talking about it, and this put me in a huge contemporary mood. It kind of made me slumpy because the books that I have to read in August are all fantasy books, and I kind of just wanted to read more steamy romance contemporaries, which I never say because I'm never really in the mood for them, but this was fantastic. This one follows a girl named Stella, and Stella has Asperger's, so she's very socially awkward. She has to have a certain way of doing things in order to cope with her autism. One of the things she's struggling with are relationships. Her mom is pushing her to find a boyfriend and to have her grandbabies. So Stella feels all this pressure to perform sexually, and the experiences that she did have were sort of very uncomfortable and very awkward. So she hires Michael, and Michael is an escort, and she hires him to teach her how to function in a relationship and sexually. And I never thought that I would say that I found an escort quite so endearing as Michael, but I did. I enjoyed this one very much. It's nice to read a contemporary adult romance. I'm not a huge fan of the YA contemporaries. I think that's what it is. These ones I find more interesting. It was steamy, but it wasn't like over the top steamy usually. I mean, there were bits of it, but the story was really great. I really loved it. I know there are more books from the series coming. I'm very curious to read them. I think this was very well done. I got a 5 stars. My favorite book of the month. Next up, because I was still in the mood for some adult contemporary romances, oddly enough, I picked up November 9 by Colleen Hoover. I went with Colleen Hoover because I know that I like her books. She's a polarizing author. Either you love her or you hate her. I am on the love her side. I enjoy her books quite a lot, actually. This one, however, didn't live up to the other books that I've read by her. This one is a dual perspective story told by Ben and Fallon. Fallon was a teen actress, an up-and-coming teen actress, until one day her dad's house caught on fire and her dad forgot that she was in there, and she was severely burned. She's got scars all down the side of her body. Now that Fallon's 18, she's decided that she was moving to New York, so she goes to tell her dad this, and her dad is sort of not being very nice to her, and she's interrupted by a boy named Ben who pretends to be her boyfriend. They have a wonderful time together. Ben is an aspiring writer, so they come up with this idea that they would meet every year on November 9th, which also happens to be the anniversary of the fire, and they would have no contact in between. Just every year on this one day they would come together, and it follows that entire story. I have to say, the first 2/3, 3/4 of the story I loved. I thought it was fantastic. The last 100 pages or so, maybe even less, maybe 80 pages, it was so slow and it killed the story for me. I like the ending of this book. I liked how it wrapped up nicely. I just don't like how the ending was presented, and I can't really tell you why because it will be spoilery, but it was so long. It was dragged out. It could have been done so much shorter, so more concise. I didn't have to reread everything that happened in the past from another person's perspective. I just didn't, I struggled through the last 100 pages. That being said, I did read this book in a day, so it couldn't have been that bad, but I just feel like this one wasn't quite as good as her other ones, so I gave it a 3.75. And the last book that I finished in the very end of July for the Booktubeathon, and that was Het Diner by Herman Koch. This book is a Dutch book. It's also been translated into English. It's called The Dinner. I did not like this book, not even a little bit. I gave it a 1 stars. If I'm being really, really generous, a 1.25 stars. This book follows 2 couples, and they come together to have this dinner to talk about their children, and you don't really know what happened, and you're sort of figuring it out along the way. This was a psychological thriller wannabe. That's the best way that I can explain it. It was so boring. And because this was my booktube movie adaptation challenge for Booktubeathon, I also watched the movie, the Dutch one, because it's a Dutch book, so the Dutch made a movie for it. There is an English book movie out or coming out called The Dinner, but this one was just called Het Diner, and it was a completely Dutch movie. I watched that one, and it was so awful. I know Dutch movies are generally really awful, but this one took the cake. It started off, let's just say, it started off with the worst sex scene I have ever seen in my entire life. But then it moves on to just take a different spin from the book. So I had a little bit of hope that maybe the movie would be better than the book, at least the plotline anyway, and it just wasn't. It was even worse. There are no words. Needless to say, I think that this is probably the worst book that I have read this year. Anyway, that wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a big thumbs up. Let me know down below what books you read this month. And as usual, if you have not yet, I would love for you to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.